So why investing into education or even vocational training? The invisibility aspect of JC, gender equality and social exclusion, is what I will try to address today amongst other aspects. Over the years, however, when working with these communities, people started appreciating how much these formerly excluded groups could contribute to community coherence and how resourceful they became to their families as bread earners, because they were given the chance to access and build their capabilities through responsive and need-based intervention. It is easy to judge and call these communities backward and uneducated, and therefore living with these deeply rooted stereotypes. We should recall that due to the lack of awareness, many policies and programs have for decades cemented such norms in our countries, in many other countries as well we work in, and prevented many groups from participating in their fullest capacities in politics, education, and vocational education and training, and in the labor market, amongst all. And for me, most importantly, we should not underestimate how such an environment also shapes identities and aspirations or sense of belonging of these discriminated and marginalized groups. The area of equity is essential to the whole notion of vocational education and training and lifelong learning, as pointed out by the UN SDGs, highlighting that everybody has the right to education and lifelong learning, and obviously also vocational education and training. The ILO's human-centered approach also puts building capabilities of all people at the heart of decent work. JC in DualVET, because of the strong enterprise engagement, provides a chance for many who have been failed by other streams of the education system, whether it's the school sector or the higher education or vocational training. While significant progress has been made at levels of policies and programs, many institutional barriers and cultural prejudices remain. When we reflect on ourselves as development practitioners, service providers, or institutional enablers, do we really operate from an unbiased place where we develop our DualVET programs? And when designing responses and plan for scale and impact, are we really sensitive to the multiple forms of the nature of visible and invisible barriers and exclusion mechanisms disadvantaged groups are facing? Do we really make sure that they reflect the voices of and specific needs of disadvantaged groups by involving the right organization or relevant people? Let me start first and briefly introduce to some of you what is meant by inclusive and DualVET at this point, which is, of course, the core area of the donor committee DualVET to be promoted. It's in a nutshell, it basically systematically combines training periods in the workplace and education in a vocational training center or vocational school in an integrated way. That means it's really aligned with each other, what is being offered. This closely interlinked format is increasingly recognized to be responsible that graduates are more employable and contribute to a skilled workforce, which is the prerequisite for a successful growth-oriented economy. An increasing number of countries, and most prominently the ones with a deeply rooted DualVET system history, focus on attaining and developing the relevant competencies in action. We call them competencies in action, to be able to actually address things from different perspectives, have transferable skills and fast, and be able to adapt very quickly to future professional challenges and participate in defining their vocational lives and participate as active and responsible citizens in society as well. And this should be valid for all learners. Many efforts are being made in that field. When it comes to inclusive DualVET in developing cooperation, do we have the same goals and aspirations for learners to attain employability or competencies in actions as we have defined it as long-term outcomes? Are we satisfied when we reach a certain predefined percentage of disadvantaged learners accessing and finishing their training and getting a job and income opportunities? Or do we seek through DualVET responses an opportunity where disadvantaged groups can systematically build their own agency, which equips them to freely choose their trade and get the right resources, mentoring support, and other network support to continuously access learning opportunities and remain employable, equally paid, and socially engaged. The many challenges faced by partner countries to realize inclusive growth, creating quality jobs, and to establish more relevant dual VET mechanisms and better performing labor markets do not make it easier for disadvantaged groups to participate. Usually we operate in labor surplus countries with limited quality jobs, a large segment of informal enterprises, and limited resources and capacities of VET centers and enterprises to deliver quality training and dual vocational education and training. In many countries, enterprises only start recognizing the resourcefulness and business case of a well-trained, inclusive workforce. Though growing in specific sectors, some of them might, it's hospitality, tech sectors, then also garment industries. The level of private sector engagement remains limited, and progress of JC often remains incidental and often not systemic. When we look at the simplified training cycle in this slide, we can see that barriers emerge at various levels and often start at the point of access to training. One can be, it's the level of education of people. Candidates for formal VET need to qualify in many instances and have a certain level of schooling before accessing VET. Then it's physical access, distance, language, gender norms, and many other barriers which could actually lead to lower enrollment. Then we have, it continues during the training. It might be delivery, flexibility, timings, lack of sensitivity, which prevent people from remaining within training and retaining their efforts. It can be in DCdVET schools or in enterprises. Even access to workplace-based training can be a barrier and a reason for dropout. This leads to higher dropout rates and often lower labor market outcomes. The same happens in access to assessment certification, which tremendously provides, in many instances, a lot of barriers as well, so that people actually have lower rates of graduation and certification. Obviously, access to jobs, fewer placement, less mobility, less income out of training efforts, and less returns on investments disadvantaged groups are facing in many instances, including continuing VET opportunities. Obviously, and to put it in a nutshell, these are policy regulations, could be costs, could be barriers, attitudes and stereotypes, awareness and communication, language could be an issue, then often standardized delivery and lack of physical physical accessibility. The cumulative nature of social exclusion leads to the complex situation where those left behind in education also tend to benefit in VET and labor market opportunities, unless appropriately addressed. Designing including VET initiatives need to address many of these multiple disadvantages, and therefore barriers and discrimination most likely already at the beginning and during the different stages of a training and labor market integration cycle. If we have the goals to ensure inclusive participation in lifelong learning and employment, we need to address access, but also address necessary legal barriers and support measures so that these groups can fully participate. A simplified yet, I think, good visualization shows this slide here, which also shows the difference of approaches and the repercussions our responses might have on the employability of a learner from a disadvantaged background in if things are not properly addressed. We can look at equality, for instance, when we look at the slide. And there is the assumption that you only have to give them equal access, treat them equally, which shows basically when you look at the picture in a very visual way, it doesn't help, because this is equal treatment, and same support everybody gets, but this doesn't lead to the change and development of the capabilities we would like to see. Obviously, in the case of equity, everybody gets the support they need, and yet there are still these barriers in between where you see the equal opportunities, yes, but when you actually look at justice overall, the systemic inequalities are addressed. Obviously, justice and the more free way of participating is visible. What does it mean when we look at JESI now being translated into dual VET projects? And to achieve the required impact, it requires policies. It requires policies and labor market integration measures which address the root causes of discrimination and exclusion, as shown us in the top area here. Setting up an enabling environment also includes active labor market measures for disadvantaged groups, as well as potential incentives for enterprises or training providers to train and employ. When we look at mainstreaming JESI in dual VET, it also needs that the environment ensures functional literacy and foundation skills, quality education, pre-vocational training, and potentially also remedial education, so that the people are actually equipped to enter a dual VET process in an adequate way and are also attractive to companies to participate. So partners need to be approached and trained at various levels when looking at mainstreaming JESI and dual VET, which is a complex undertaking and takes time. Addressing access to formal VET through inclusive quality education or remedial education is one of them. So before dual VET actually becomes really effective. A center enterprise will have to revise their policies, activate additional resources, training staff to support the different needs of the learners, employees, and provide more accessible, flexible, and enabling environments. In many cases, this would also require additional efforts like physical adaptations or physical infrastructure in the case of disability, introduction of adapted technologies and adaptations of learning materials, but also additional coaching engagement, and in many cases, as I mentioned, even literacy numeracy program. Today, an increasing number of enterprises see diversity and inclusion as a business case. Some are adopting JESI policies, while an increasing number of startups even builds the company based on the foundation of gender equality and social inclusion. There are very active and dynamic thematic work groups, networks, which highlight good case practices and lobby for gender equality and social inclusion across the world with governments and the private sector and training providers. I'm only briefly touching this with two cases. One is, which I think are quite representative and quite different when they are approaching gender equality and social inclusion. And with both, I was in touch and had worked. Therefore, I find them very inspiring examples. One is Schneider Electric, which integrates as a company strategies all SDGs, the relevant SDGs to the company in their CSR, in their foundation activities, but also in their core businesses. On the example of gender equality, one actually sees that they're changing hiring practices. They proactively enroll women as in a dual apprenticeship model in male-dominated new trades. And I would like to highlight that Schneider Electric is a French firm. It's a French firm which clearly is sold into dual apprenticeships as a model of training. Then continuous training, promotions, equal wage effort, but also in their development programs and CSR, they are also working on training for entrepreneurship so that clean technologies can actually be promoted and distributed in the countries where they operate. So an extract of their equal commitments by 2025 shows that they really want to hire 50% women women 40% in frontline management, 30% in leadership teams, and also reach out to more than 50 million people accessing green electricities. A second example I would like to highlight, where I did a case study for the ILO at that time, it is Lemon Tree Hotels. And they started in 2004 and are operating in 56 destinations now as a mid-class, mid-level hotels, employing currently 8,000 employees. They have a charter since 2007 for equal rights and inclusiveness, and it's called Opportunity for Deprived Indians, which is addressing really the entire JC spectrum we are talking about. By now, they have reached 16% of people being from this deprived Indian group, as well as 12,000 people, 12% of people with disability, which they trained and also retained in their labor force. So their growth model is actually built on this. So they have a learning and people culture. They have a very strong talent management and equal treatment policy. It's interesting how they work and how they expand. They usually started to train people, then and hire them immediately, and then retain. That's their value. And how did they do this? At the beginning, it was really that a significant share of the labor force was trained through a dual vet offer: electricians, plumbers, cooks, hospitality professionals, receptionists. They were trained in a long-term dual vet offer and absorbed and actually made it up through career pathways in the firm, which has expanded and retained with this retained labor force, which they continuously build. At the same time, they also work where the disadvantaged groups really lack these functional and foundation skills required for training with specialized organizations for catch-up education, soft and vocational skills, or directly hire and provide structured workplace-based training with specialized organizations as a mentor. Further education, as I mentioned, soft skills training. Everybody, for instance, in these hotels, no sign language. They are sensitized. They are sensitive to disability. I have very clear training on it and performance criteria of sensibly addressing. Then also equal pay and opportunities also for people with disabilities are offered. This event, I think, provides a very nice environment to share. And I'm sure such rich experiences, which I just touched upon, and learnings will be shown and shared amongst us during these discussions.